Hello, and welcome to the Book of Heroes podcast. We are a weekly show dedicated to helping you get better at Storybook Brawl. I'm Sidney, and this is my co-host, Jesse. How's it going this week, Jesse?
Pretty good, thanks for asking. But I did realize today that you always ask me how I'm doing, and I never ask you how you're doing. So, Sidney, how's it going, Sidney?
Pretty good, Jesse. Thanks for asking.
Hey, wait, that's my phrase.
This would work better if I wasn't so blindsided.
Got him.
I now know how you feel the first time I asked you that question. I'm doing well. I'm taking a day off to do spring cleaning, which is not something I would have expected myself to do when I was a child, but...
Which is a very adult thing to do.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. I don't know if that's quite the purpose of a vacation, but it's hard to make time in our busy adult lives for that sort of thing otherwise.
Yeah, I definitely understand that. Hopefully it goes well for you.
Thanks. Yeah, so I'm pretty excited for the topic today. We're kind of going to be covering two things in one, sort of the general strategy for playing a defensive early game, and then all five of the heroes for which that's most applicable, the heroes that do not have a power in the early game, and you have to sort of manage that transition. So right now that list of heroes is Apocalypse, Grandmother, Morgan Le Fay, Pan Shadow, and Xelhua. Before we get into that, though, I did just want to take a minute to check in on the metagame. It's been a couple weeks since the most recent patch released, and I think it's flattened out a bit. Jesse, what have you been winning with lately?
Well, Treants is probably the number one pick, if I can choose what comp to go into. The synergy between Ashwood Elm, Burning Tree, and Echowood is just overpoweringly strong. That a lot of other comps can't even deal with your giant tree that's on fire. So that's what I say would probably be the number one pick for right now.
That makes sense. And yeah, I'd agree. Treants is definitely the strongest late game strategy, but I don't feel like it's quite as dominant as some of the other late game strategies we've seen in the past, like Dwarves or Slay pre-patch.
Yeah, there's definitely some diversity. You can win with a variety of things as long as you have a cohesive team together. You can still play Evil with Great Pumpkin King, Animals with Bearstain, Mages with Hatball. I'm sure there's others.
Yeah, all the classics. Slay is still viable if you can get the scaling going. I even managed to make a Monsters comp work the other day. I think the only two comps that I'm really avoiding are King Arthur Royals and Dwarves, but I think there's maybe even a place for Royals. I don't know if there's a really good one for Dwarves.
Yeah, it seems like if you want either of those comps to work, you need a little bit of support from your hero ability or something along those lines. So, for example, a Knighthood from Gwen on an early King Arthur, or obviously Mahiri can go Royals still.
Yeah, and those aren't necessarily the strongest heroes, but still a thing you can do. I think it's also worth mentioning, I've had good success in the mid-game and even early late game with comps that aren't built around sort of a whole team synergy. Just stuff like Tweedledee that's taking advantage of stat boosts from treasures can get you pretty far.
Yeah, since a lot of the best comps right now, or a lot of the more playable comps right now, can come together at level 6, that means you don't necessarily need to find your direction early on.
Yeah. Cool, and I think that's pretty much it for the metagame. Pretty similar observations to what we talked about a few weeks ago, but I think we can be a little more confident in them now. And with that, let's jump into our main topic. So as we mentioned, we're going to be sort of covering the general steps for playing a defensive early game, level 2 and level 3. And this is something that can apply to any hero, though it's especially relevant for the heroes we're going to talk about today. And then we're going to go into each of those specific heroes and what you want to pay attention to for them.
Yeah, the early game discussion is kind of going to be a more, I don't know if detailed is the right word, but a more nuanced discussion about how to master the early game from one of our very first episodes. And then we're not really going to cover the mid-game too much because we did a lot of that in our How to Win When You're Losing episode, since you'll typically will be falling behind with a lot of the heroes we're going to discuss today. And then finally, the late game is kind of unique to each of the different heroes that we're going to be talking about, so that's why we'll be covering them in the hero-specific section.
Exactly. Yeah, the episode you mentioned, How to Win When You're Losing, I would say that's sort of supplemental reading or listening, if you will, for this one, since it covers a lot of concepts that are really relevant for these heroes in particular.
All right, well, let's talk about the early game. I think we're going to divide this out into level 2 and level 3, because the gameplay is very different between those two levels.
Yeah, and before we get into that, just a couple notes on the early game in general. So some of the things we're going to talk about today are just good strategy that makes sense to pay attention to for any hero, but partially it's also an expression of priorities. Like, there are a lot of heroes that have specific goals during the early game. Maybe you're Wonder Waddle and you're rolling to upgrade your level 2 and 3 animals. Maybe you're Gwen or the Fates and you're building a game plan around a specific character. But if you're one of these heroes that doesn't have that direction, then you just kind of want to play the basic or generic strategy that we're talking about here. This is also something that I think is worth focusing on if you're planning to play in a tournament, because the tournament metagame tends to be a little more punishing in the early game, since all the players in your lobby are strong and kind of scrapping for every edge they can get. It's more important that you don't have a string of 3 losses in your first 6 turns, because that can really keep you from getting to a point where you can actually win the lobby, or where you can actually do well in the lobby.
Yeah, I guess another way to think about it would be that the advantages you can gain from risky plays in the early game are just not worth the health cost that you would lose for making such a play.
So I guess getting into it for level 2, I think the first point is just expressing your goal. And if you're playing a hero with no power, your goal is to win or tie every fight.
Newsflash, Sidney, that's your goal for any hero.
Okay, you're not wrong. But I want to emphasize, your goal is not to find 3 blind mice. Your goal is not to scale a Wizard's Familiar. Your goal is not to get a Slay on Polywalker. Your goal is to win or tie every fight. So
yeah, you are focused on the present, the here and now. You don't want to line up something that will make you a little bit stronger in 2 or 3 turns at the cost of losing fights now.
Yeah. So the first thing to do in support of that goal is you want to spend all of your gold that you can on buying characters. You should end level 2 on 4.2 with a minimum of 4 characters and more if you can get them.
The only exception to this is that you might want to spend gold on spells that let you buy more characters. So the economy spells are top priority here. That includes Forbidden Fruit, Shrink Spell, or even on 2.1 when you have an odd number of gold, you might be prioritizing a Genie's Wish, which could give you the chance of one of those other econ spells.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty clear that you're buying those spells when they're available, but I would also say that you would want to lock one of those 3 spells if you saw it on 2.0, because that gives you a much better shot at getting extra characters on 2.1 or 2.2, which is one of the ways that you get ahead. And since you don't have a hero power, getting ahead really just means staying on par with everybody else.
Yeah, additionally, these econ spells, as I think we discussed in one of our previous episodes, don't necessarily cost you the fight early on, because if you manage your gold correctly, you'll end up with the same number of characters for a couple of turns as your opponents, and then eventually have more, starting around 2.2 usually.
Yeah, and while notably Forbidden Fruit does lose you 2 life, almost always buying an additional character will mean you win or tie at least 1 fight that you wouldn't have otherwise, which should make up for that 2 life loss. Maybe the only exception is if you're buying like a 1/1 character that doesn't impact the strength of your board or something.
Even then, that 1/1 character might be the difference between your opponent's 0/3 living through the fight versus having that 1/1 slay or attack and kill that baby root.
Yeah, fair enough. But along those same lines, another really important principle is you don't want to buy 1/1s. So this is pretty obvious for like Kitty Cuppers, which is already pretty bad, but I think you don't want to buy Polywalkers, you don't want to buy Wizard's Familiar unless there's a spell you can cast that same turn in the shop, which makes it a 2/2 that scales, which is not that bad. I don't think you really want to buy Happy Little Tree, even though that does give you scaling over time. Usually buying a Happy Little Tree means that you will lose at least 1 fight, and that's not really a price that you're interested in paying.
1/1 that you didn't mention is Black Cat, and that's because Black Cat isn't really a 1/1. The Last Breath effect summons another 1/1, which makes it the equivalent of 2/2 in stats. That doesn't even mention any synergies that Black Cat has with some of the other level 2 characters, which we'll be talking about in a second here.
Right, yeah, I would not include Black Cat in that category. I will say, though, you mentioned it's on par with just a regular 2/2. I don't think you want to buy 2/2s if you have a better option either, right? So the main ones I would say are Blind Mouse, Crafty, and Golden Chicken, since their abilities don't help you win or tie fights at all. Those are characters I would only buy if the other options are worse in terms of stats or are supports that you don't have the tools to use.
Yep. We're not going to go through every single character just because we've done that already in the past, but you want to avoid the, I guess, weaker half of the combat characters whenever possible when you're already playing from behind without an early game hero power.
Yeah. The next thing to mention is support. So I think Fanny is good if you can set her up with another dwarf, since she's giving you 4/4 in stats. Baby Root and Mad Mem are interesting because they're effectively like playing down a character. So the heuristic I tend to use for those characters is to buy them, they need to be giving you more than a 2/2's worth of value. For example, Mad Mem supporting a 2/2 usually just means that that 2/2 trades with something, which it had a good shot at doing anyway. So that's not worthwhile. But Mad Mem supporting a Black Cat means that that Black Cat likely trades with 2 characters, and that's worth buying the Mad Mem.
Yep. Baby Root is a little bit harder to evaluate, but personally I do like putting a Baby Root behind 2/2s, because that makes them 2/5s, which can trade in with a lot of the other characters and survive, effectively giving you more than just the value of another 2/2 instead of that Baby Root.
That makes sense. I probably buy Baby Root a little less than that. I would typically only try to pair it with Tiny or Labyrinth Minotaur so that those characters, which normally trade 1/1, can start trading 2/1 instead. But it's maybe not the worst thing if the other options in your shop are terrible.
Yeah. And while we are going to talk a lot, that's, I guess, a really good point. While we're going to talk a lot about what character you would prefer to buy, sometimes you just don't have an option, and in order to spend your gold efficiently, you're forced to buy characters that are subpar, and in those cases, you just need to make the best of a bad situation.
Yeah. The thing that you really are looking for at this level, though, is synergies that let you set up your characters, and kind of the baseline you want is like having one character trade with multiple 2/2s, since that's the baseline for what your opponents are going to have. So we mentioned Black Cat. You're looking to pair that with Mad Mem, and I'm also fine with pairing that with Labyrinth Minotaur, because Minotaur on its own likely trades with something, and then a 2/1 cat will trade with 2 things usually.
Yeah, and then if you're looking for a synergy with good instead of evil, you can do Lonely Prince plus one of the princesses, the Sherwood Sure Shot or Cinderella. Lonely Prince is the Frog Prince, specifically, is the best stat line for a 2-cost character individually, and therefore is more likely to trade with your opponent's characters and survive.
Yeah. While that's true, I think that it's worth noting that I would pretty much never buy an actual Lonely Prince, because I would only be buying it if I had a princess in the same shop that I could buy first.
And I think we differ in opinion there, because I would buy the Lonely Prince on speculation of rolling into a princess later, especially if the rest of my shop is only marginally better, like a 2/2.
Yeah, my feeling there is that buying a 1/1 throws away 1 fight, and 3 HP matters a lot when you're playing one of these characters. Plus, sometimes you don't find the princess until like 3.1, and in which case you've really lost out.
It's certainly a bit of a gamble, but also my reasoning there is buying a 2/2, vanilla 2/2, is likely to lose you a future fight, and possibly even more than 1 future fight. So there isn't a clear-cut decision there, but...
Or at least we don't agree.
Yeah.
I think one thing that I prioritize a little higher is the Fanny synergy. I definitely will prefer Fanny over other 2/2s, because combining her with any other dwarf, even another Fanny, means that she's giving out 4/4 in stats and enabling some of those 2-for-1 trades that you're looking for. She's definitely worse now that dwarves are not a force in the metagame, but you can definitely just like play Fanny plus Fanny at level 2 and you're totally fine.
All right, now that we covered a lot of the stronger synergies that you can find at level 2, there is one character we kind of neglected to talk about. Humpty Dumpty.
Whew, yeah. He's definitely complicated, because on one hand, as one of these characters, you want to win your early fights, and you want combat power, and Humpty Dumpty's a good place to get it. But on the other hand, you don't have a backup plan. There's no hero power to fall back on. When do you take Humpty Dumpty when you're playing a hero with no power?
Yeah, I tend to buy Humpty Dumpty in situations where buying something else will almost assuredly lose me the fight. So maybe my shop is a kitty cut purse and a polywoggle. I'd probably prefer the Humpty Dumpty over either of those options. But I guess on the flip side, I'm also more likely to buy Humpty Dumpty if I'm really strong already. Maybe I found 2 frog princes from a forbidden fruit on 2.1. I'm going to win the fight. Humpty Dumpty just really ensures that happens.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I think it's probably the most skill testing and contextual character to buy, though, because, like, for example, if you're going up against, like, Loki or maybe, like, Merlin on 2.2, Humpty Dumpty's not good because there's a really high chance those characters are going to have strong boards that'll be able to crack the egg.
Yep. So, yeah. Just because you're trying to win or tie every fight doesn't mean you should buy Humpty Dumpty every time you see him.
Yeah, even though he might win the fight this turn, he might lose you your next 3 fights because he cracked, so be careful there. I will say Humpty Dumpty gets a lot better with 4 Glory on 2.1, which is the synergy we covered last week. If I have a shop with, let's say, Humpty Dumpty, some 2/2s, and a 4 Glory, I will often buy the Humpty turn 1, lock, buy a 2/2 and 4 Glory turn 2, and then hopefully sets me up for the combo and gives me 2 turns of assured victory. It does set you up for a little bit of risk if you do end up facing Loki on 2.1 or something, but I think it's usually still worth it because the upside is pretty high.
Well, pretty high is maybe a stretch, but at the very least, the 4 Glory will replace the Humpty Dumpty if he dies, putting you back on equal footing.
I kind of disagree. I think if the Humpty Dumpty cracks, you probably lost or tied the fight.
Do you not put Humpty Dumpty slot 1?
Depends.
Okay, I pretty much always put Humpty Dumpty slot 1 on 2/1 or 2/2. If you do end up buying Humpty Dumpty, especially on the earlier turns, it's a good idea to put him early on so that he gets those 2-for-1 trades, hopefully surviving them. But if you put him in your last slot and you don't have the supporting characters to trade with your opponent's characters, sometimes you won't win the fight because your opponent's damaged characters still are damaging your Humpty Dumpty.
Interesting. That's counterintuitive, and I'm not sure that's actually what I do a lot of the time, but I can see how it makes sense.
Yeah, it's obviously situation specific. Like, you're much more likely to do it with a baby root, for example. And then later on, you probably are moving Humpty Dumpty to the back to reduce the chance of him dying. But on the early levels, it's the most likely way to ensure that you win the fight with your egg.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that I probably need to update my heuristic on that one. Cool. So that covers level 2, I think. What about level 3?
Well, your strategy hasn't changed much. You still want to win or tie all your fights.
Yeah, but it's harder, right? Because that's a lot of hero powers really start to get good around that time. And I feel like it's less in your control. Like, you're more likely to be facing some crazy board from Wonder Waddle or something.
Yeah, not to mention that people usually aren't tripling characters at level 2, but at level 3, they might start to have those treasures added to the mix, and there's a lot more variance in what your opponent's board could look like.
Yeah. So while you still would like to win or tie every fight, realistically, your goal is probably just to, like, not lose all of them.
Yeah, not lose the number of fights that would cost you more health than you have.
Well, I don't think that's a realistic risk, but yeah. So I think the main thing that you're looking for is just a synergy that gives you immediate strength, right?
Yep. We've talked through several of these already, but just to rehash some of them. The supports, like Good Witch of the North and Wicked Witch of the West, both give far more stats than your average level 3 character, but distributed amongst the supported characters. So that is one way to increase the power level of your team. Especially the Good Witch of the North, because the health bonus often lets her supported characters trade in with your opponent's characters without dying.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Good Witch. She can really benefit some of the high health characters. Even like a Rainbow Unicorn is a 3/8 can be pretty good on 3.0. And she also pairs really well with the White Stag, which is the next card on the list. I feel like this is probably...
surprise, we're talking about White Stag for the 50th time, but White Stag is quite a lot of stats. And moreover, you can put some of those stats distributed onto characters that really benefit from them, like ranged characters, Trojan Donkey, or the like.
Yeah, exactly. Worth noting, it is sometimes correct to play 6 characters or to move a 0 health support to slot 1 in order to let your White Stag attack. If the alternative is just like adding a 2/2 or something to your board, because that massively increases the chances that you will actually get the 9/9 worth of stats.
Speaking of 9/9 worth of stats, Queen of Hearts is easily able to get that with a couple of evil characters in your team.
I disagree. She can get 8/8 or 10/10 worth of stats.
All right, well, thank you for the literal interpretation of that. But regardless, Queen of Hearts can grow very big and become a powerful force with or a very easy, I guess, supporting team.
Yeah, if I see a Queen of Hearts in the shop on 3.0 or 3.1, as long as there's like 2 evil characters either in the shop or on my board, I am very happy, and I'm just like moving straight in as one of these characters, because while it doesn't last forever, a lot of times these characters do not need to last forever. They just need to survive the mid-game, and Queen of Hearts is a really good way to do that.
Yep, and the last really strong thing that you can do that we wanted to call out is if you have a Sleeping Princess and a targeted spell in the shop, that is kind of the Frog Prince of level 3. The Awoken Princess is the best stat line you can get from a individual 3-cost character.
Yep. So just something to mentally check every time you see a Sleeping Princess. Ask yourself, is there something I can target this with? I don't think you ever buy it on speculation as one of these heroes, but if that combo is right there, you definitely want to take it.
One character on level 3 that we're a little divided on is Princess Peep. I personally think that Princess Peep is a very strong level 3 character when combined with supports like a Mad Mim, because you can have Princess Peep summon tokens into the supported slots after the supported characters die.
Yeah, I tend not to like that play as much, mostly because it makes your positioning really awkward. Oftentimes you don't get the full 3 tokens, or they summon into places where you don't really want them and they're just 1/1s, and it eats up your attacks. Like often the token in slot 4 will attack instead of the character in slot 5 that you really want to get an attack. But I'll acknowledge that if you have enough supports or treasures that can let the sheep trade with your opponent's characters, Princess Peep can be a reasonable choice.
Yeah, there are a lot of those. For example, Eye of Ares makes you incredibly good at tying fights. Crown of Atlas or even Fountain of Youth both give a decent amount of stats to all of the tokens to make them at least relevant. So while she definitely needs a little bit of support, pun intended, to help you win your fights, I often think that there's enough of that in the game that you should consider purchasing her when you see her.
Fair enough. I personally don't think I take her outside of playing like Geppetto, but...
Well, if you're playing Geppetto, that's a whole different story. But
yeah. I think we should probably talk about treasures a bit. We covered level 3 treasures in our previously referenced episode on how to win when you're losing. But level 2 treasures, I think there's basically 2 that are really good at giving you immediate impact, which is what you're looking for.
Yeah, that's Jack's Jumping Beans, which gives a random character +4/+4 at the start of the brawl. And then Shepherd Sling, which gives all of your characters +1/+1 as long as they're level 2 or level 3.
Yeah, these are both good. I've actually found that the Jumping Beans can be pretty decent into level 4 if you have a board of like ranged characters and friendly spirits. But at this point in the game, it's like adding an extra character or 2 to your board and sort of makes up for the cost that you're paying of finding the level 2 triples.
Yep. So when you can, prioritize those early treasures that can give you stats so that you don't lose a whole bunch of health in the early game. There are a couple other ones that we didn't mention here because they're situational, like Dark Contract, for example. But those are still things that you could keep an eye out for as I need power now to make it to the late game.
Yeah. I think another thing that we maybe disagree a bit about is Needle-Nose Daggers. I tend to think this is a bit of a trap as a character with no hero power, just because no matter how bored your strong is with no matter how strong your board is with the daggers, sometimes you'll just like run into that Loki or Wonder Waddle brick wall of massive upgraded characters and you'll lose the daggers the turn after you take them.
Yeah, there is definitely that risk, but the treasure itself is risky. And sometimes I think that risk can really pay off, especially if you already have lots of token summoners. Cough, peep, cough. Then those daggers can be easily the most impactful treasure you can find at level 2. And even if it only helps you win the next 3 fights, that could be arguably worth it if you compare it to something like a Secret Stash.
Fair. My experience is they typically help me lose the next 1 fight. And I tend to prefer them if I'm playing a hero that has a power that's already helping me win, but there's maybe a time and a place. Couple other quick hits. I do think that on 3.0 specifically, Prized Pig is a pretty strong character to buy as a character with no hero power, because that's the point where if you've been prioritizing your board, you might be a little stronger than someone next, and getting an influx of even just 2 gold can really set you up for the next few turns. This gets a lot worse at like 3.2 when opponents have been able to take advantage of their powers more, though.
Yeah, you also can't discount the stats on the prize pig. As a 3/6, it is one of the highest cumulative stats between level 3 characters. So even if you completely disregard the ability, it might still be the right purchase in the early stages of level 3.
Yeah. As far as buying XP, I think in general that's not a great play, but some of the heroes that we're going to talk about do have a preference for more XP. And generally speaking, since your hero powers tend to kick in a little later, if you actually are strong, if you've been able to assemble one of these comps that we've talked about that give you immediate strength, I think it's fine to buy Turkish Delight or something on 3.2.
All right, well, we just bought Turkish Delight on 3.2, and now we're level 4. Are we going to cover anything in the mid-game about these heroes?
Well, not a lot, because one, some of the heroes have powers that do impact the mid-game, and two, we have an entire episode that covers how to play defensively in the mid-game. A couple quick addendums to that episode. We didn't mention Gingerbread Knight because it didn't exist at the time we recorded it, but if you're at 20 or fewer health, this is a really good buy to replace any weak character in your board. Definitely a priority at level 4. Burning Tree, great with supports. Probably not without, though. And keep an eye out for places where Oni King and Tweedledee at level 5 can give you strength, because those characters can slot into a board and kind of help you stabilize.
We mentioned at the very start when we were talking about the metagame that just a little bit of synergy between two characters can carry you through the mid-game if it's strong enough. And I think Oni King and Tweedledee are really good examples of that.
Yeah, in particular, you don't need a full comp of monsters to make Oni King work, because really you just need a monster in like 1, 2, and 5.
Yeah, even if you just have a Friendly Spirit and a Wretched Mummy attacking in and getting that +7/+7 from the Oni King, that's still +14/+14 in stats on characters that use those stats really well. And that can be a pretty good mid-game strategy, even though you're not really in a full monsters comp.
Yeah. We should also mention that while Nian is still solid in terms of stats, the ability to find a level 5 treasure more equally is actually a good bit worse on this patch, because there's 5 new level 5 characters, so it's harder to find that second Nian than normal. I think that makes it so that comparable characters like Southern Siren can be better than Nian if the situation is right, whereas previously I would have almost always bought the Nian.
I think I'd still prefer the Nian in those scenarios, but I know you have a soft spot for Southern Siren.
Fair enough. Okay, so now that we've covered the mid-game, it is time to talk about the heroes. And we're going to start with the one that's probably the most complicated, Apocalypse.
Yeah, Apocalypse reads, when you reach level 6, devour all your characters, then fill your board with random level 6 characters. On this patch, he starts with 45 health.
Yeah, so we should talk a little bit about how that ability works. I think, first of all, he devours all of your characters. So if you have 4 characters on your bench, when you hit level 6, they will be gone. If you happen to have 0 characters when you level up to 6, you will still get 7 level 7 characters.
Yeah, one thing I learned today, while researching for today's episode, is that Apocalypse will not give you any pairs of level 6 characters. So all 7 of the characters that fill out your board will be unique.
Right. There's a total of 14 level 6 characters, and you'll get 7 of them, so while you're not guaranteed any character, you've got a pretty good shot at it, and you're likely to get a distribution of characters that
don't necessarily synergize with each other.
Yeah. So, I guess the next question is, how good is Apocalypse?
Well, Apocalypse is, and has historically been, quite good. On this patch, he is in the top 10 of heroes, according to SBBtracker.com. And on previous patches, that has also been true. Although I think he might have risen a little bit with this patch.
Yeah, he's definitely better now than he was in the Dwarf, Slay, Pumpkin King era. I think when he started, he had 50 health and he was the top hero. And I think that makes sense because the winning comps that we talked about are all kind of founded on level 6 characters. Aside from Slay, they're not too focused on scaling characters prior to that point. So the ability to get 7 free level 6s is pretty beneficial, and it's pretty reasonable to build a comp out of those characters.
Yeah, with that in mind, because you cannot carry over any non-level 6 character, or actually any characters at all, when you level up to level 6, That does mean that you're probably going to be going a couple of specific strategies focused on a level 6 character.
Yeah, so we'll cover that in a second, but I think we should talk about how you get there first. So it's pretty clear that you want to play a defensive game from level 2 to level 5. Obviously, you don't care about scaling. You just want to win or tie as many fights as possible, as we've been saying. I think one question that I have an opinion on, but I'm not 100% sure it's correct, is when to buy XP. I tend to think that Apocalypse's hero power is strongest when you're matching your comp of level 6 characters against someone else on 5.0 or 5.1. If you don't buy XP, then you're facing your random assemblage of level 6s against someone who's maybe built up their scaling comp and even found a keystone level 6 character when they hit 6.0. And since you've often lost a lot of HP right up until that point, it's important that you're at least a couple XP ahead of the lobby. But I think you tend to play Apocalypse a little more defensively, Jesse.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is correct, but I tend to only buy experience when I think it won't cost me winning the next fight, or that I'm stronger than most of the lobby. And that just doesn't happen on Apocalypse because you really don't have a hero ability. So I tend to play a bit more conservatively and not buy experience until 5.2, which we'll talk about in a second. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's the correct play, especially since your random assortment of level 6 characters usually doesn't have enough synergy to actually win you the fight the turn that you get that trigger. And that means you can kind of count on losing a fight before you can really stabilize with a full synergetic board.
Yeah, that's certainly true. I think for me, I'm looking to buy at least 1 XP spell. 2 is very difficult unless I get a Merlin's Hat maybe, which I do think is a uniquely good treasure for Apocalypse because you're really interested in XP spells, and the economy helps you once you hit level 6 as well. But regardless, though, your strategy really changes right around 5.1 with Apocalypse, right?
Yeah, and the notable reason for this is that Apocalypse's ability triggers whenever you hit level 6. That can be during the buy phase. It doesn't necessarily have to be after the brawl when you normally gain your experience.
Right. So if you were to level up after the brawl phase, you lose all your characters, and then you have 12 gold to replace things from your board. But if you can buy XP on turn 5.2, you can sell your entire board plus whatever is in your hand before you buy that XP spell. And if you do that, you still get 7 level 7 characters, but usually you have about 18 gold instead of 12 to roll through the shop and assemble a more cohesive comp than whatever you got naturally.
Yeah, if normally the devoured characters are just essentially wasted, you get no benefit for having characters in your hand. But if you sell them beforehand, they're each worth 1 gold, and that's a pretty significant bonus on your weakest turn. Well, I don't know if it's your weakest turn, but one of your weaker turns.
Yeah. Plus, that gives you your board 1 level ahead, which means you're facing weaker boards on your opponent's side, which is what we talked about before. So there's a very specific cadence for this, because you actually, in order to really give yourself a good shot at this, you basically want to spend level 5.1 rolling to find XP, which means spending all your gold on rolling until you find a shop that has an XP spell in it. Sometimes you'll have enough gold left over to buy something and improve your board, but often you'll just buy like 2 or 3 low-level characters out of that shop and lock it.
Yep, bank the gold for next round, and ensuring that you have your experience spell on 5.2.
Yeah, so we should talk about what the actual stats of getting this to work are. I did some number crunching before the episode, and if you make 12 rolls on 5.1, you're about 60% likely to find an XP spell before you lock.
You're about 60% chance to find an XP spell that you can lock.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't find a spell on 5.1, and you keep rolling on 5.2, you actually don't want to roll out to all of your gold, because then you're going to have to like sell your board to find an XP spell, and that's not particularly good. But if you make 8 or so more rolls, you've got another 55% chance, and overall, counting 5.1 and 5.2, you're about 80% likely to be able to buy an XP spell on 5.2 without having to sell off your board to find it. That said, once you get down to like 3 or 4 gold on 5.2 and you still haven't found a spell, at that point you probably just want to play out the fight with your current board, right?
Yeah, it's not worth getting the random board of level 6 characters one turn earlier at the cost of a significant amount of health in most cases, which would be the case if you started selling your board and did not find that experience spell.
Yeah, because it's actually worse to level to 6 with 0 gold, because oftentimes you get a character that adds almost nothing to your comp, like a Lordy.
Lordy is the only level 6 dwarf, and since you can only get one of every type of character, that means Lordy is never going to be better than a 9/9.
Yeah. So, okay, let's assume this worked. I got my 80% shot. I've sold my board, unless I'm casting the end, in which case I sold my board minus 1 character.
But plus some health.
True. I've got maybe 18 gold, and I've got a random board of level 6s. What do I do with it?
Yeah, so with a bunch of level 6 characters and no lower level characters, that means you need to kind of focus on a strategy that uses one of the level 6 characters as a focal point. And there are really 4 of those that you want that are really feasible in that regard. That is Trance, Good Boy, Great Pumpkin King, and Animals.
Yeah, and I'd say those are roughly in order of preference. Trance is the best. Good Boy is probably the second best. Pumpkin King, and then Animals is the weakest and also a little harder to put together.
Yeah. Trance is pretty self-explanatory. You'll be focusing a lot on Ashwood Elm. There are 3 other Treants at level 6 that can benefit from the stats from Ashwood Elm. If you do end up going Treants, you'll probably be spending your gold looking for Burning Tree or some other Treants to really fill out your board with those trees. And as many Ashwood Elms as possible.
Yeah, Burning Tree is particularly important if one of your characters is an Echo Wood, because that lets the Echo Wood be a character with health instead of just attack. I think the second comp that comes up often is Good Boy. So obviously you need a Good Boy and a couple other good characters. And usually you're pairing this with Robin Wood, right? Because that's a cheap way to give your Good Boy attack.
Unless you're running an Echo Wood, your Good Boy is probably your weakest attack character. And so, therefore, Robin Wood is going to buff the Good Boy with its ability and can give your other good characters a significant amount of attack. It's worth keeping in mind, though, that usually with Good Boy, you want to be running an Echo Wood to double the amount of stats you're distributing across your entire team. And that doesn't work without some other sort of intervention, since Echo Wood is going to steal Robin Wood's bonus attack.
Yeah. You don't necessarily need Robin Wood here. Something like Sting can also work if you have a treasure that carried over, but it's probably the most natural way to enable this comp. Since you're unlikely to have a full board of good characters right at that point, Grumblewar can also work for a turn or two just to give your Good Boy some attack. But in the next 2 turns, your primary goal is to swap out your board for all good characters. If you are tilted more toward the evil side of the spectrum, then Great Pumpkin King can also work pretty well. And that's sort of the mirror image, right? You want to just find a full board of evils and then hopefully find a treasure. Instead of buffing your Pumpkin King, you want to buff all your Pumpkin King summons.
Yeah, that's definitely one way to approach it. You also want to make sure that your evil characters are higher level evil characters, usually level 5 or level 6, so that when your Pumpkin King dies, you fill your board with characters that are relevant to the fight. Hopefully some scammy characters like Medusa or Apple Tree, or just enough stats to finish out the brawl.
Yeah, usually you're doing this because you have several level 6 evil characters already, but definitely you want to prioritize 5s and 6s when you can replace the rest of your board. And lastly is Bearstain, and I think you only really want to do this if you also have a 3 big pigs. Notably, Bearstain is good and is a way to buff Good Boy.
That is true. There could be a little bit of overlap there. If you do end up going Bearstain, you want to pick up more copies of Bearstain and more animals that summon animals on last breath. You can try out Time Flies to summon more animals from your hand, or put other animals into a crockbait. But because you need a specific tribe and Bearstains for this to work, it's kind of a little harder to assemble quickly.
Yeah. Notably, I think we probably should mention, though, Echo Wood does work with actually all of these except for evil, but Echo Wood is probably a reason to go animals because Bearstain is a good way to buff Echo Wood. We should also maybe mention that a lot of times you'll be sort of pivoting between multiple different comps. Like, often I'll have Bearstain and Good Boy and not immediately be sure which of those directions I'm going to go in. I'd prefer Good Boy, but if the shops I find are all baby bears and big pigs, then Bearstain it is. In terms of characters that you want to rotate out, I think the top picks are probably like Lordy, because he's just a vanilla 9/9 with no synergy. And then probably the next one is Jormungand, since there aren't any Slay characters at level 6 and you can't really assemble that comp from scratch.
Yeah, that one takes time to build up, and then Apocalypse eats all your efforts. So it's really hard to put something Slay-oriented together. And therefore, as soon as you find something better than a 2020, he's probably going to be your first cut.
Yeah. Other stuff, Storm Canyon Hercules can just sort of sub in temporarily. Hercules in particular is a nice way to get a treasure, especially if you can combine it with Green Knight or Grumblegore to get the quest a little faster. But, overall, what it's going to look like is over the course of a few turns, you're going to take out all the characters that don't fit into your preferred comp and replace them with characters that do. And at that point, if you've maintained good health and you're a few XP ahead of the rest of the lobby, you're in a fairly decent position to win the late game.
Yeah. Well, after Apocalypse, we're going to move on to another hero that's a lot more straightforward. Grandmother.
Yeah, so Grandmother has 50 health. She is the highest starting health of any hero. And she says when you reach level 6, you become the big bad wolf. Your characters have +5/+5.
So, while Grandmother is a pretty straightforward design, as far as heroes go, her power level is actually probably a bit higher than you'd expect.
Yeah. In the current metagame, she's slightly below average, although definitely not unplayable. In past metagames, she's actually been near the top, I think, particularly in the Pumpkin King focus meta and also the Dwarves one. I think in certain situations, that 10 life buff can actually be pretty beneficial.
Yeah, especially in metas where high rolling into a composition that deals a very large amount of damage out of nowhere to somebody, having that extra health buffer can be the difference between taking 21 and getting knocked out early, or taking 21 and then still having enough health to live and stabilize and find something strong. And we think that's why she was at the top for a while, but in all honesty, we're not really sure.
Yeah, Grandmother, let's be honest, she's not the most interesting hero, so I think probably a lot of people, including us, don't really prioritize her. But it's worth keeping an eye on those stats, and as metagames shift, paying attention to, is 50 health the right thing to succeed in this particular setting. But in terms of playing her, it's pretty simple, right?
Yeah. Her global +5/+5 buff upon hitting level 6 is not something that you really need to build around. Most compositions, maybe with the exception of Royals, have at least one or two characters that really benefit from stats extra well. And because of that, you don't need to play a composition that focuses on that particular aspect of her hero power.
Yeah. Grandmother does play particularly well with animals and Pumpkin King because the summons really benefit from the bonus. But as you said, Good Boy benefits, Ashwood Elm benefits, and even stuff like Triply and Tweedledee and Dwarves get a bonus from her effect. In terms of the mid-game, I think you're playing similarly to Apocalypse, but maybe with a little less focus on XP.
Yeah, your hero ability is just extra health until you hit level 6, so you want to conserve that as much as possible so that it makes the difference in your placement if you are knocked out early. And if you hit level 6 and have a strong board, then the extra +5/+5 is just kind of a little cherry on the top for the most part.
Yeah. Also worth noting, I think Grandmother's, apart from Apocalypse, is the only hero where you want to buy XP spells on 5.2. At that point, it's actually just a very powerful combat spell and worth considering.
All right. After Grandmother, we have Morgan Le Fay. Morgan Le Fay's hero ability is when your hero's health drops to 20 or less, pick a treasure of your level, and then do this again when your health drops to 5 or less.
Right, and notably she does start at 45 health. I think Morgan Le Fay is also another hero that's like a little stronger than you'd expect. Right now she is just slightly above average in terms of hero tiers, definitely not top level, but better than more than half the heroes in the game. And I think the reason for that is just 45 HP is nice, and then the free treasure is a pretty solid benefit, even though it doesn't kick in until later.
Yeah, when you're playing Morgan Le Fay, you really want that treasure that you get to be as impactful as possible, which means you want to survive, or you want to stay above 20 health until you're level 5 or level 6 to get the most impactful treasure that you can.
Yeah. We should probably mention that you're not expecting to get that second treasure at 5 health, right?
Yeah, once you hit level 6, the minimum damage that your opponent's going to be dealing to you is 7, and they could do significantly more if they have upgraded characters that live through the fight, which means that you're not always going to be falling into the threshold between 1 and 5 health. Sometimes you'll just be knocked out from 10 or even higher. So you should not rely on the second part of your hero ability triggering.
Yeah, although it's really good when it does, because usually you get it at level 6. As you mentioned, though, I think the core strategic point of Morgan Le Fay is preserving your health to get that treasure at level 5 if you possibly can. Level 5 treasures are way better than level 4 treasures.
Yeah, a couple of interesting things to keep in mind while you're playing this hero. The ability can trigger multiple times if you're able to get your health back above the threshold of either 5 or 20. So, if you drop below 20 the first time, discover a treasure, and then regain health through Health Potion, Ring of Regeneration, or the End, and drop below 20 again, you get a second treasure.
Yeah, that's really good. So, I think you want to be casting Healing Potion and the End more often as Morgan Le Fay. I think it's decent in general, but I think it's especially good when you're on one of those breakpoints. If I'm at 20, I'm absolutely casting Healing Potion, and even if I'm at like 18, it's still maybe worth it because I might find one or two more before I lose my next fight.
Yeah, also the End is a spell that can give you a significant amount of health with a single cast, so even a Health Potion at 15 or 16 health might let you roll into a the End and then go above the threshold again.
Yeah. Once you're at like 10, it's probably a little less relevant.
Even at 10, the amount of damage you take from a fight has to be even higher to knock you out rather than dropping you to below 5. So
that's a good point.
I'd argue that it is pretty good to be healing at 10 health as Morgan.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. For those same reasons, Ring of Regeneration is a pretty good treasure to take as her. It's a solid treasure anyway, and it gives you the potential to get a second treasure, which is the main way that you sort of exploit that hero power beyond its base level of impact.
Yeah, I think the last interaction that I'd really want to call out is that you are discovering a treasure, which means that treasures that increase the level of the next treasure you find will work. So, for example, treasure map. If you drop below 20 at level 5 and you have a treasure map, you're getting a level 7 treasure rather than a level 5 treasure.
While that makes total sense, it is not something I realized before researching for this episode, and I think that makes both treasure map and runestones really good picks with Morgan.
Yeah, they're already normally one of the better picks at their levels, but on Morgan, they're kind of the number one go-to.
Yeah. Other than that, I don't think there's too much unique strategically. You can go any comp, basically go wherever your treasures take you, and just really focus on winning or tying your mid-game, your early game and mid-game fights. Getting a treasure at level 5 is so much better than getting it at level 4.
Also, some people like to ask, what if I never drop below 20 health? Without really thinking about that question. If you're never dropping below 20 health, that means you won. So congratulations.
Yeah, I had a Morgan game last week where I managed exactly that. I got through the whole game without ever using my hero power. Felt pretty good.
After Morgan Le Fay, we have Pan's Shadow. Pan's Shadow's ability reads, when you reach level 4, level 2 and 3 characters no longer appear in your shop. He's a hero that we talked about a couple of times on some previous episodes because this was a pretty new change. And now that we've had a couple of weeks to see how he settles out, what's Pan's Shadow like, Sidney?
Not good. I think I've heard a lot of people mention anecdotally that they've had trouble playing this hero. That's been our experience as well, and I think the reason is it is not good. Pan's Shadow is in the bottom 5 heroes on SBB Tracker. And I think that makes sense, because this ability is almost a downside at level 4. It cuts you off from tripling your level 2 and level 3 characters and getting those treasures, and it makes spending your gold at level 4 really awkward. You'll also notice that all the other characters that we're talking about today have a health boost, and Pan's Shadow doesn't.
Yeah, I know that I've had several games where I hit level 4 and I'm like, oh, I only get to buy level 4 characters now, it's going to make me so much stronger. And it really doesn't, because often what I need to tie a composition together is like my 3rd Queen of Hearts, or some other thing I just don't have access to anymore.
Yeah, I think maybe an underrated thing about upgrading characters is just improving your positioning. Sometimes you'll have 2 Frog Princes that are 5/5s, and you really need them to be a 10/10 so you can fit them into your board. Or, to pick another example, I had 2 Wizards Familiars that I'd been scaling on Pan's Shadow, and they were 10/10s. Normally I'd just triple them, and I'd have a 20/20 upgraded character that would keep getting better. With this, I had to sell both of them. I was losing that strength. And that's in addition to just the pure kind of economy problems of having to spend all of your gold in 4 cost increments.
Yeah, it makes for a very awkward play experience. We had previously suggested the strategy of hoarding up some gold while going into level 4 to make that a little bit easier. Buying golden chickens or maybe some cheap characters with your leftover money to give you more flexibility on those levels. But in all honesty, after trying that, it might still be the right play, but it just doesn't make a big enough difference.
Yeah, I still like the idea of buying extra characters, especially the chickens, but you're right that it's hard to make it work. That said, I think there are a few things you can do when you're playing Pan's Shadow if you want to try him out or you like his playstyle, and it is kind of a neat play experience. First of all, quest characters are relatively good because they give you that treasure access. You really want to deprioritize getting doubles of level 2 and 3 characters unless you want to play both of them. So like, for example, White Stag is a really bad double. I will say that Romeo is a pretty good character to buy since you'll be able to find Juliet much more quickly.
Yeah. As for later game strategies with Pan's Shadow, you are kind of limited to the same ones as Apocalypse, with the exception that you could also start scaling up Slay, because you'll have easy access to finding those Lightning Dragons and Riverwish Mermaids.
That can work if you have both of those characters in the shop. Treants, obviously, with relatively easy access to Heartwood Elder, can work. And then I would also consider sort of a royal strategy, maybe not the full-on King Arthur royals, but like Court Wizards and Gingerbread Knights are just good on their own, and then you might have a Romeo to pair with some Juliets or something. If you can't find any of that stuff, I think your best bet is just to buy the level 4 supports, Sporko and Lady of the Lake, and then pair them with Burning Tree, Tweedledee, and Wombats in Disguise at level 5 to take better advantage of those stats.
Yeah, Pan's Shadow might see some buffs in the future, might not. We could see this hero changing a lot based just solely on the meta, but for now, a bit difficult to work with.
Yeah, probably not a priority if you're trying to win, but it's a cool idea, and I could see it changing, especially if they're willing to dole out the HP a little more generously. And that brings us to our last character on the list, Xelhua.
Xelhua has 45 health, and his ability says that your level 4, 5, and 6 characters cost you 3 gold instead of their normal cost. Sidney, how good is Xelhua? Also, we pronounce him differently, apparently.
Yeah, well, my heart says number 1, but SVBtracker.com says number 8, which is probably more accurate.
That's still pretty good, though. The top quartile, for sure.
Yeah, this ability has been good ever since he got 45 HP, and the reason is it just gives you an incredible economy later on. At level 4, I like to think of this as similar to having like a spinning wheel, although it's really kind of better than a spinning wheel because you're often buying multiple characters at level 4, but it only gets better from there. At level 5 and 6, you can easily fill up your board with strong characters. You can find treasures much more easily, high-level treasures. And it also lets you sort of speculate on strategies that you don't know you're going to go down. You can buy a bear stain and see if you see the other pieces for animals in the shop. And if you don't, you're only out 3 gold.
Yeah, that and the ease of tripling level 5 and level 6 characters by investing a smaller sum of money are 2 of Xelhua's greatest strengths. The flexibility in the late game, being able to buy things that you don't necessarily have to play because the opportunity cost is less for you. And then accumulating those high-level treasures is often a good enough strategy to win on your own, regardless of what you're playing.
Exactly. And I think that's kind of the theme with Xelhua, regardless of what you're playing. So, in terms of game plan, same as these other heroes, you're playing a defensive game, level 2 and level 3. At level 4, you're probably buying 2 to 3 level 4 characters when you hit level 4. And you can start populating your board in a way similar to Pan's Shadow, but not only is it cheaper for you, you can also complete your 2 and 3 triples if you need to. I don't know if there's like one strategy that's like way better with Xelhua. Maybe trees, just because that's the best strategy overall and you did a discount on it.
Yeah, with Xelhua, you can really play anything because I guess the primary thing you want to be doing is buying high-level characters, but every strategy has high-level characters that they want to be purchasing.
Yeah, so basically you just take whatever's available, and like I said, you can just buy a character that looks like it might be strong, and it's not much of a cost if you never find the other pieces. I would almost always buy Burning Tree just to give myself a way into Treants, or Neon, as, maybe I'll find the other Neon, maybe I won't, but it only costs me 3 gold either way. So, really powerful hero that I don't know if there's really that much to talk about in terms of strategy.
Yeah, I know Sidney's devastated by this because Xelhua was one of his favorite heroes, but we just don't have much to say beyond Well, we've already shared.
Yeah. So I think that largely brings us to the end of this episode. We covered the strategies to play a defensive game at level 2 and 3, and then we went through all of the heroes that strategy is most applicable on, the ones with no hero power early on in the game. And I think this stuff is really important to understand, not just because some of it's sort of the basic strategy that applies to every hero, but also because some of these heroes are some of the highest on the charts, and it's really important that you understand this playstyle as opposed to just kind of playing a hero power that gives you almost like a crutch in the early mid game, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a different play experience and one that you might need to practice a little bit, but getting it down means that you have several more heroes that are available to you whenever they come up for selection.
Yeah. As always, thank you all for listening. We love to hear your feedback if there's strategies you found useful on these heroes, or maybe if you just try one out for the first time. I suspect there are some people that have just never played Apocalypse, and definitely worth a shot. Let us know how it went. The best place to get in touch with us is on our Discord server. There's a link in the show notes. It's a great community of folks that are looking to improve their storybook role play. You can also submit feedback on the show there and submit questions for us to answer on air. You can also follow us on Twitter at Book of Heroes SBB. I've actually been posting things on Twitter now. I'd like to think it's at least moderately interesting if you're one of those Twitter people. Jesse's making a weird face at me.
What is a Twitter person? Is that a bird person?
Cool, you're not a Twitter person. You don't know. You can also get in touch with us by email at bookofheroessbb@gmail.com. You can find our episode catalog on our website, bookofheroes.podbean.com, and also on major podcasting platforms, the usual iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and so on. Lastly, you can find us playing Storybook Raw. My username is Koga305.
And I go by Undefined. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week. Do you have a story for today, Sidney?
I do. I've been saving this one up ever since our episode on the new meta. So we talked about how Polywoggle might be a good strategy on the Fates, right?
Okay.
Well, I decided to give it a try. I had a game with Fates where none of the characters in my shop on 2.0 were very good. I actually took the nuclear option and I decided to roll instead of buying a character on turn 1.
Wow, that's something.
Yeah, well, I don't know for sure whether it was the right play, but it worked out. Because I was able to lock a Polywoggle, which you would think would just be an absurdly tempo-negative play. And it definitely was for a couple of turns. But I was able to do the thing we talked about, where I bought the Polywoggle. I didn't buy another Polywoggle on 2.2. Instead, I bought 2 other characters. But since I locked my shop, I was able to complete my triple on 3.0. And I slayed with my 5/5 Polywoggle. I don't remember what level 4 character I got. What I do remember is that I immediately True Love's kissed it, and I got a Baba Yaga.
Okay. I mean, that's not bad at level 3, but not exactly groundbreaking, since there's not a whole lot of slay abilities that you really want to be tripling.
Yeah, that's fair. I think I paired it with a Kitty Cut Purse on that turn.
Money!
Yeah. But here's the great part. So I was starting to plan my Baba Yaga slay comp for early on, but on my level 4 shop, I found another True Love's Kiss. So naturally I cast it, and I got a Great Pumpkin King.
So you had an upgraded Great Pumpkin King on 4.0.
Yes. Now, there's good parts of that and there's bad parts. The bad parts are that I didn't have a full board of evil characters yet, and most of my evil characters that I did have were level 2. So the Pumpkin King was just going to summon a bunch of 1/1 cats. The good part is that Fates gives +3/+3 to upgraded characters, and upgraded Pumpkin King summons upgraded characters.
So you had upgraded cats.
Yes. I'll go ahead and tell you, I didn't win this lobby, but I'm almost surprised that I didn't, because I can only imagine what it's like as an opponent to face down an opponent on 4.1, you take out their whole board, and then their Pumpkin King pops, and you are staring down 7 upgraded characters with +3/+3 stat buffs.
You're giving me PTSD from the level 5 Great Pumpkin King days.
Yeah, it only got better from there. I did end up facing a Horde Dragon at the very end who had some kind of ridiculous treasure comp. I can only assume that they didn't face me earlier, because otherwise they probably just would have died on the spot. But I think that is probably the most powerful thing I have done in a game of Storybook Brawl if measured against where the lobby is typically at.
That does seem pretty strong.
So anyway, that's my brag for today. Thanks for hanging out and listening to it.